Hey everybody, Jane here with my Part 2 September 2019 wrap-up. Now if you followed my Part 1, there was only 4 books, it wasn't a very productive month, and I wasn't sure how it was going. Then I hit a reading streak. Mostly because I have some really amazing books that I read in the second half of the month, and some of these were things that I read in a day. As a matter of fact, a lot of these were things I read in a day. My second half of the month, I had 15 books. So I'm really excited, really amazing. So yeah, this is hopefully going to be a great wrap-up video. I will say a lot of these I'm just going to go over and give you like the book, the premise, star rating, and any big things about it, because most of the books that I'm going through are going to have their own review videos, although those review videos probably will be out November, December. I am currently making plans to put up a video a day in December, and so when I do that, a lot of these probably will get there because I'm backlogged on review videos. Anyway, let's get started. I'm going to go through these within like star rating categories. Now within that star rating, it won't be necessarily least like, most like, it's just categories, but they will be categorically in order. So we'll start with the one book this month that was my DNF. And that was Sometimes I Lie. I know Sometimes I Lie is a bit of a YouTube darling, and I got, I don't know, probably a third of the way through and just realized that it wasn't something I was totally into. I was kind of bored. I wasn't enjoying it. And the fact that we had an unreliable narrator, for me, wasn't something I super liked. So I did go ahead and, because I was bored and not really feeling it, I checked the Goodreads to see kind of what happened and what I missed out on. And at that point I decided, you know, the things happening weren't going to make this book something I wanted to read. It sounds like by the end a lot of people weren't sure what was real and what wasn't, and I just don't personally enjoy that in a story. I want to know what's going on and to have a pretty good idea of what the truth is. And if it's an unreliable narrator, I want to be able to look past their lies or their issues to, you know, kind of be able to tell, okay, this is what really happened, even though they're not being real honest with me. So yeah, Sometimes I Lie just wasn't for me. I do have a 2-star read this month, and I don't give out a lot of 2 stars. So for me, a 2-star book has something that is fundamentally wrong with it that makes it a book I didn't enjoy. So this isn't just a book that I personally, due to personal taste, didn't feel. It was a book that I felt was fundamentally flawed at some level. I do want to say that I think this particular book is one that you will either love or you will hate. And I am in that I didn't like it category. And that was Cold Moon. Now, Cold Moon is a book in a series, and it is, at least in the beginning, about a group of detectives who are looking after trying to find this serial killer. There have been 2 murders, and each of them have had a ticking clock next to either the body, or in one case, we haven't found the body yet. It's presumably in the river, but there's blood everywhere and a ticking clock, and it looks like the person was tortured until they fell into the river. So I picked this up actually for part of the disability readathon in October, but then decided I didn't want to read it for my TBR for the disability-thon because I had some other books I picked up that were calling to me a little more. But this has a detective who is a paraplegic in it. So I was really stoked. I thought that would be really cool. I love mysteries, more so cozy mysteries, not so much the police procedural, which is what this is closer to. But I was excited because it had a paraplegic. One of the people investigating was paraplegic. I am going to be doing a full kind of rant review on this later, but the highlights of why it wasn't for me is, number 1, there was too many point of views, and number 2, there was too many twists. So this book for the first half was a 3 out of 5 for me. It was okay, it wasn't amazing, but it was a typical mystery. We have detectives pursuing the murder. It's fine. Then we have the first twist. And at the first twist, I didn't love it, but it was still a 3 out of 5. It was like, okay, I didn't really see that. I didn't see it coming. I didn't necessarily like it, but fine. Then there were more twists. And by the end of everything, I was like, hold up. That was too much. That was too many twists, and that was dumb. So I did not like it, but again, depending on how you felt about those twists, you might have thought it was brilliant. I thought it was too many twists and they didn't work for me. So yeah, 2 out of 5, didn't like it. But if you like books with like a lot of twists, you might. I did want to mention though that if you were wanting to read it for like the October disability reads, just be aware that the paraplegic detective didn't play nearly as large a role in it as I wanted him to. It is a series and there's more books in the series, so he probably plays a bigger role in other books, but it was mostly his sidekick. So yeah, I didn't love it. So on to the 3s. We have Murder at the Vicarage, and this is an Agatha Christie mystery. This is the first Miss Marple mystery. Basically, a guy is visiting the vicarage and he is murdered, and Miss Marple must come in and investigate the murder. I am not going to be doing a full review on these or most of the other Agatha Christie's I'm reading, just because for me they haven't warranted a full discussion. However, I do encourage you to go to books like Whoa. She has done amazing book reviews on all the Agatha Christie books. She did a Marple and a Poirot read. I'm currently doing that as well, but her reviews are more insightful than mine could ever be about these books. So if you're interested in more information about The Murder at the Vicarage, please check out books like Whoa. It was fine. It didn't do anything amazing for me. It was a decent, solid mystery. I liked it. It was funny. I enjoyed it. I enjoy Miss Marple. I enjoyed the narrator. It was fine. Yeah. All right, the next one, my other 3 out of 5 is The Morgans and the Jewel of Baran. This is a middle grade fantasy. There are 5 siblings who are visiting their grandmother. When they are swept into another world, they have to go on a quest in this world. It's kind of Narnia-esque. It was fine. Juvenile fantasy is something that is kind of hit or miss for me. The second book in the series looks pretty cool because it's got pirates. I did enjoy it. It was a good time. I will say that this is the, I assume, British version, because some of the grammar is a little weird for me. For instance, Mr. doesn't have a period after it, and quotation marks are single instead of the double, so one ear instead of the double bunny ears around words, which is fine. It just threw me off a little bit, though it didn't in any way affect my enjoyment. I was sent this book by the author. I wanted to thank the author. It was a fun read. If you like kind of a Narnia-esque story, this heavily reminded me of Narnia without the theology. So, like I said, kids get sucked into a magical world, have to go do a thing in the world. There's some unanswered questions at the end, but it was fine. Okay, so now we're getting into my 4s. I have Mary Higgins Clark, Two Little Girls in Blue. Basically, twin girls are kidnapped. One is returned, and the rest of the book is about them trying to figure out what has happened to the other little girl. Her twin insists that the returned twin insists that her sister is alive, and they have to figure out if they believe this twin because the kidnappers have said that the other girl died, and if they believe her, and if they believe that she has a psychic connection to her sister, and if so, they've got to go rescue her. It was a good, solid 4 out of 5 read. Mary Higgins Clark does some cool things. It was a nice thriller. I've got a full review for that one. Doggy Daycare Murder features Melanie Travis, goes and she is helping her friend decide if this particular doggy daycare is a good place to put her dog, because Melanie Travis has a history as a dog shower. She's got three standard poodles, I think, that she used to show. Her aunt is teaching her son how to show dogs, so she's kind of a doggy expert, and her friend isn't, so that's why she gets sucked into going and approving of the doggy daycare. And while they're there, one of the owners of the doggy daycare is murdered, and Melanie must help figure it out. Melanie is also a new mother, so I really related to this, as this character is dealing with the mom thing, and she's also got an older child, and there's a lot of dogs, and I mean, this was just a good, fun mystery. I really enjoyed it. 4 out of 5. Say Yes to the Marquess. This is the second book in the Castles Ever After series, so I've now read book 2 and 3, and I do intend to read the rest of the series because it's a really good series. Cleo is engaged to Piers Brannan. However, that engagement has been drug out for years and years and years. She is feeling unloved, feeling unwanted, feeling like if he really wanted to be married to her, they would have already been married, and that is kind of what the rumor mill says. He has been away on government business, and honestly, she's just tired of waiting. She happens to inherit a castle and decides she doesn't need to get married now. She can take care of herself. She now has the means, so she goes to Piers' brother, who is his legal representative, to break it off. Rafe, the brother, decides that she cannot possibly break off this engagement, and he insists that as soon as his brother gets home, which will be soon, they're going to get married. It's going to be wonderful. She's going to be so happy with his brother, and he starts helping her prepare the wedding. In the course of this wedding preparation, in his mind, she's a girl, and as a girl must, as soon as we throw you dress and cakes and get you in a wedding mood, you'll just fall into Piers's arms and be like, oh, marry me. A little bit sexist, but whatever. It was overall a good book, a fun time. She does, as they're planning the wedding, fall in love with the brother who's helping her, and it was just a fun read. I had a good time. There's a really cute dog theme. A dog theme. Rafe has a dog who belonged to Piers, and he's a cute old dog that Rafe just adores and takes good care of. So, yeah, I had a good time with this. It was not as good as When a Scot Ties the Knot, which is the third book in the series, but I did enjoy it. I've decided I love Tessa Dare. I did originally read this in the audio, but I found this at a used bookstore for 25 cents, and so I picked it up, because who can beat that? So it is awesome. I recommend this series. I had a good time. I do have a review of this, but basically the thing I loved is these are all funny. Tessa Dare is so good about funny. She's so good about dialogue. These feel almost like a contemporary romance, but in a historical setting, and they tend to be hot and steamy. This one got a little bit meh for me when it came to some of the bedroom stuff, but overall it wasn't bad. Another Tessa Dare I have is Lord Dashwood Missed Out. This is a novella of the Spindle Cove series. I've heard great things about the Spindle Cove series, so I think after I finish Castles Ever After, that will be the next Tessa Dare series I read. I did have this book just sitting on my shelf. It probably came from a library sale too, so yeah, I was excited after I read after I read When a Scot Ties the Knot. I kind of went a little bit crazy on Tessa Dare, and I basically want to read everything she's ever written because she's pretty amazing. So I did read this one. It's a novella. It is about the girl Eleonora writes a essay about Lord Ashwood, who missed out on a great relationship with her, basically. It's basically a very angry letter to Lord Ashwood about the things that he missed out by not being with her when he had the opportunity. In real life, there's a Lord Dashwood who wanted to be with her, but decided he had other things he had to go do, and so he comes and basically is like, that's plagiarism, or libel. It's libel. And there's a discussion of, well, it isn't libel if it's true, so prove to me I missed out. It was good. I wish I'd have read the Spindle Cove stuff first, because the characters of Spindle Cove kind of play a part in this. And at first I was like, I don't care about these people. They're just in my story. I want to get to Dashwood and Eleanor kind of figuring out if he missed out or not. But that was fine. It was very frustrating at first, but then I liked the Spindle Cove people, and now I really want to know more about them. If you're going to read this, I suggest maybe reading it in the Spindle Cove order first. So I do recommend, but preferably in order. I haven't read the other Spindle Cove, so I may change my mind about that, but that is my initial thought. The next book I read was Cure, A Journey into the Science of Mind Over Body. This is a nonfiction. This is a proof an uncorrected proof that I was sent a while ago, and I'm just now getting to. I really enjoyed this, and especially if you are in the medical field or interested in the medical field, I recommend reading this. This is kind of the science of why placebos, or it touches on the science of why placebos and holistic medicine that don't seem to have a good scientific reason for doing anything, do things, and that they do work. It talks about some things that are being explored right now, such as using virtual reality and hypnosis for pain control. It really was mind-opening, and I think I would love everybody in the health industry to read this. I don't know enough about the science-y stuff to know if this is good information, but it made a lot of sense to me, including talking about things like our bodies reacting to things that we can't always see, and in the medical field, us needing to be aware of the connection with the mind and the body, and certain things can stimulate the production of hormones, including painkillers, that aren't necessarily just pain-killing drugs. So it was so good. I highly recommend, especially if you're in the medical field. It is a nonfiction, so those can get kind of long and drawn out. That one was pretty good, pretty easy to read. A couple of moments where it wasn't so great as far as like tedious, but not too many. The next one, I'm not going to be doing a full review. It's just a graphic novel. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I love graphic novels. It is the third of the series I've read. I don't remember what it's called, what the series is called. But it's the third book. I do wish I had read it closer to the first two, because it took me a little while to get into the story and know what was happening. I'm not going to go into too much detail what this particular graphic novel is, because it's the third in the series, but basically you have a dystopian world. The guy with the blonde hair is a rebel in the dystopian world. The girl in the uniform was somebody who was, I don't remember in the first book what exactly she was some kind of police officer or peace officer. She did something with law enforcement, but then some stuff happens and she starts questioning about how their world is being run. This was a good series. I liked the art. I liked the story. I do plan on reading the actual books now, because I did feel like, probably if you've read the books, these are amazing. If you read them by themselves, there's a lot of contextual stuff I wasn't entirely sure about. So while I really enjoyed it, I was like, I need to know more. The next 4 out of 5 I had was I'll Never Tell. I did buddy read this with my best friend, so that was so much fun. This is about 5 siblings who, their parents have died in a train accident, and they are now going to this campground that their parents owned. And at the reading of the will, it is announced that the father believes that one of them murdered a camper several years ago. He believes it was the son, and so the kids have basically like 48 hours to decide if their brother did it and if he should inherit. It was really neat. I really had a good time. If you like kind of mystery thrillers, this is really good. The next 4-star read I had was My Lovely Wife in the Psych Ward. This is a memoir from a guy who talks about his wife's difficulties with mental health. At a couple points in their marriage, she had to be put into the psych ward. And it just is really powerful. I don't think we see stories about mental health enough from the family and caregiver's perspective. And I think depending on what you're looking for in the book, I loved it, but I also saw a lot of reviews saying that people felt it should have been told from his wife's perspective, but I didn't think it was really her story. It maybe was mistitled if you're looking for a book about a person's experience with mental health, but this is a caregiver's experience of dealing with a family member with mental health. And for me, it really resonated. I have several family members who have mental health problems. We lost my grandfather to suicide. So being aware of the difficulties of being in a family with mental health issues, so much that he said really hit home. I really loved it in a very personal way. I could relate to the experience as somebody who has family members who can be sick. And there is a scene in particular that really just struck me, and that is he has, I think he wrecked his bike. He might have wrecked his bike. He in some way got physically injured, and his wife had to caretake for him. And I think he just felt so put out because she was not nearly as involved in caretaking for him as he felt he was for caretaking for her, and he really needed her to be. And this year earlier, I struggled a little bit of a mental health crisis myself. And one of the challenges with being in a family where there's a lot of people who have mental health crisis is that it's very difficult to get the love and support and attention sometimes that you might need for yourself in a crisis if you are not the sickest person in that family. And I did have a little bit of an experience with that. Like, I had to call my dad and be like, Dad, I just need you for a couple minutes, or for like a couple hours. Can you just sit with me for a couple hours? I just need somebody because I feel like, I'm not in my right headspace, and I just need some company for a couple hours so that I can make sure that I'm thinking clearly, making good choices, things like that. And on the other hand, like this person, her parent, the girl in the book, she was the only one in the family who had a mental health crisis. So, her parents are flying in from out of the country. I can't remember. His family was in Japan maybe, and hers was in Italy. And like family members are coming out and they're helping and they're staying and they're like really on top of things, to the point that actually the patient, his wife says throughout parts of the book that she feels smothered because, he's controlling her medicine so she doesn't overdose. And, everybody's kind of watching her and being with her and trying to take care of her and visiting her in psych ward and all this stuff. And that is not the kind of response you get when you are not the sickest person in a family where there's a lot of sickness. Like, you can be, when I was having my mental health crisis, I was very much like, everybody's already exhausted from dealing with everybody else's mental health crisis. So it was hard for me to ask for help. It was hard for me to be like, hey, right now, today, I need to be the sickest person. I need to get the care because I'm really struggling. So when he had his physical accident and was physically sick and had, wanting people to kind of gather around him, but everybody was already exhausted from helping with his wife for years, that really struck home. So there was a lot of things in that book that struck home with me. Another thing I think that struck home that maybe is hard to understand if you've never had family members with mental health issues is his counselor had told him he needs to prepare himself and mentally accept that his wife might at some point commit suicide. And that's something you don't think about accepting if you are in a normal, healthy family. Like, it should be out of the blue. But especially if you've dealt with family members who have mental health issues and have lost a family member already through suicide, that just becomes part of the reality. Like, if I got a phone call tomorrow that one of my family members who I knew was sick had killed themselves, I would be sad and devastated, but it wouldn't be like, I can't imagine that they ever did that, because once the first suicide in your family happens and you see other people go through the mental health stuff, it becomes a part of your reality that people do that. It's not like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that anyone would do that. you accept that it's real. And watching him go through that in this book and talk about it just really hit home, because I don't feel like the caregivers and family members of people who struggle with mental health are touched on, and being a caregiver are touched on the same way that like mental health sufferers are. And I'm not in any way trying to detract from the people that suffer from mental health, because obviously that is a tough road, and you all are heroes for waking up every day and doing what you need to do and just surviving day to day. But I also love seeing it from a family member's perspective, because being a family member in a family where people have some serious mental health issues, it's not something that is as talked about as I would like it to be. So I really loved that, and I really could relate to that book. The last 4 out of 5 I have, and then we'll get on to my 5 stars, was Death of a Gigolo by Laura Levine. I love this series. It is the Janie Austen mystery series. This book is not necessarily a great book. It just is a lot of fun. I love the author's voice, and by the character's voice, because it's told in first-person point of view. So our character Janie Austen is hired by a rich lady to basically write the next 50 Shades of Grey. Janie Austen is not that kind of writer, but she's going to give it a try because she likes money, and she's poor and tired of being broke all the time. As she is writing this 50 Shades of Grey, a younger man comes and basically seduces the older woman she's writing this novel for. That younger man is murdered, and Janie has to figure out who murdered him. Again, if you read the series, you'll probably enjoy it. It's got the good stuff in it as far as the great Janie Austen voice, kind of the jokes, especially the things about being kind of a bigger girl, a little plus size. It's not super long. I think it took me 5 hours to read. The mystery itself is just okay. If you've never read a Janie Austen mystery, you might not have seen it coming. If you've read a ton of them, it's one of the tropes that she uses a lot, and pretty early on I was like, oh, this is probably what we're doing. And I didn't know all the details, but I was pretty right that it was mostly what we were doing. So nothing too spectacular, but again, a fun, enjoyable read, 4 out of 5. All right, my last 2 are 5 stars. So the first one I gave a 5 star to this month was called Typin, Bout, My Generation. And here's the thing. It is meant to be a book to consider, or to make older people, like retirees, consider writing a book. That is the intention of the book. I didn't necessarily love it for that reason, though. I loved it because it really explored the generational gaps. It talked a lot about things like how a person who was alive and experiencing the Kennedy assassination has a different perspective on that than a person in my generation who, I mean, I know that happened from history, but I wasn't alive during it. And I don't have all those feelings. I don't understand the emotional context of it. Just like my kids will never understand the emotional context of 9/11 and the horror of that. We recently, in September, were doing a thing for Cub Scouts where we went to some war memorials and we were talking about 9/11, and it occurred to me that, you know, my kids, they don't know what any of that means. They're just in the aftermath of it. It's just another page in the history books, but when you're living through it, it's not. And so the horror and the feels and things that I felt about that are something that I can convey in my writing, but not something that somebody who didn't live through it probably can convey as well. They can write technical stuff about it, but they may not get the emotions. And that's why the author of Typin, Bout, My Generation was saying, you know, you retirees, you've lived through so much, you've had so many experiences, only you can talk about that. So that really hit home for me. And the other thing I think that really hit home for me was the author explained how why older adults have trouble with technology, and she explained it in a way it never occurred to me before. And that is basically, we as youth tend to assume that they just aren't caught up on things. But she explained more or less that they have to relearn everything. Like, the way you used to do things, what you're doing now is completely different. So I know how to, I personally, one of the first generations of people who like had the internet and who had a computer, I can take my knowledge of that computer and kind of like move it forward to get to where I am and use a computer fairly decently. I'm not real techie, but a little bit. Whereas people from like my mother's generation who didn't have computers that do the same things, a lot of times their concepts of like what things do, it's not ingrained. Like, they don't understand necessarily how to get to their applications on their phones or the applications on their computer, because back when they had computers, it was just a disk. You shoved it in, you typed in stuff. There was, like, our very first computer, when I was really, really little, there was no mouse. There was no nothing. All the printer had the little holes in the paper. And so, like, the way you use that computer is so different than the way you use the computer now, that especially if they didn't need those things and weren't working with technology and skip several generations of stuff, it can be really hard to figure out how different the technology is, because, you know, my computer doesn't even have it has a disk drive, but I don't think most do. Most things have a thumb drive now, and you don't have to have a thumb drive to operate the whole thing, whereas back in the day, our computer couldn't do anything unless you put in a disk. So, and Ninie, who's the author of Typin About My Generation, she explains it a lot more differently than that, but that's kind of the gist of, she explains really well why technology is so hard for people who are older. I really thought it was a good book. It really resonated with me. I would give it to older people in my life, and actually even younger people in my life. But I loved it. It just wasn't necessarily that I loved it for the reason of, you know, I'm not the intended audience. I'm not a retiree who is going through and being like, this book is awesome because it talks about why I should write a memoir or a book because of my generation. Well, I'm a younger generation. I'm not even the intended audience, but I still loved it. I did get that one from the Sterling and Stone as an ARC read. As some of you know, I'm on the ARC reading list for them, so I get a couple books a month from them to read, and I absolutely love that, which is good because earlier this month, or the end of last month, I can't remember which it was, I had one that was a 3, and that was my first 3 out of 5 for Sterling and Stone, and I was really disappointed. My last read of the month, and my last 5-star, was The Handmaid's Tale. Now, this was a reread for me, and I loved it the first time I read it, so I'm not really surprised that it is a 5-star. I read it because I wanted to read Testaments. I'm about a quarter of the way through Testaments. Love it so far, so I'm predicting it's going to be a 5-star read. If it's not a 5-star, I highly expect it to be a 4. I feel like most people know what The Handmaid's Tale is about, but just in case you don't, there is a really religious dystopian society that takes over, and they strip women of their rights. And the main character of this book is Fred. And she is a handmaid. She was married, but her husband was previously divorced, so their marriage was no longer acknowledged under the new regime, which believes that, you know, only a first marriage is valid. And so her husband she's separated from her husband, and her child is taken away. Possibly her husband was killed. We don't really ever know what happened to her husband, but her child is taken away, and she is brought to the Rachel and Leah Rehabilitation Center to become a handmaid. And handmaids are basically women who are passed around the wealthy families to reproduce, because women in this world have very low birth rates and low fertility rates and a lot of like problems with babies. So probably from environmental factors. It's something that they only touch on here, but Testaments talks a little bit about it too. The birth rates are low in this society, and part of it too, honestly, is the people who are in charge are like older and probably not ready to make babies. So yeah, we have we have Offred, who she's on her second or third placement. And she is there to sleep with the commander and hopefully have a baby for the commander. If she doesn't, she could potentially be sent to the colonies as an unwoman because, you know, she already screwed up her life by marrying somebody who was previously divorced. So it is kind of her struggle and her side of the story in this really religious, complicated world. I love it. I believe this book should be a required read for every person, but at least every woman who is old enough to comprehend and deal with the content of this book. There is some obviously sexual stuff in the book, so I wouldn't give it to like a 9 or 10-year-old, but I think every like 16-year-old girl in the whole world should read this, and this should be, I feel like, required reading in school. I feel like it should. So that is what I read September 2019. What did you read? Did you enjoy your reads? Did you have as good of a reading month as I did? My social media is below if you would like to connect with me off of YouTube. And also, just FYI, I'm a writer. I write mostly romance and historical romance. So if you enjoy reading those kind of things, there are links below to check out my books. And I really appreciate when anybody does that. I don't have a Patreon or any other way to support this channel, so I just ask people to check out my books, and that's kind of how this channel started, was so that I could let people know, hey, I love books, but I also write books, and I'm just as passionate about the books as I write as the ones I read. So thanks, guys. This is Jane. Talk to you next time. Bye.